Go on, Mate. Reveal it. Whoa, look at that. Wow. What's it called?
This is the Bugatti Tourbillon.
In the vast range of really, really expensive supercars, very few come as close in price to a Bugatti. They've lived up to their reputation with their newest model, the Tourbillon.
A tourbillon is the hardest mechanism a watchmaker can build. Bugatti named an entire hypercar after it. And now, 2 years after its reveal, that car has finally started reaching the 250 people who bought one sight unseen. Underneath that name sits a 16-cylinder engine with no turbocharger at all, paired with 3 electric motors for a combined 1,800 horsepower, 2 seconds to highway speed, 276 miles an hour, with the right key. Here's what that kind of precision actually costs, and what 250 buyers just got for it. 250 cars, 0 left to buy here, is the number that defines everything about this car before a single spec gets mentioned. 250. That is the entire production run of the Bugatti Tourbillon, forever.
This is the Bugatti Tourbillon.
Tourbillon.
Exactly.
Oh, explain it.
So tourbillon is a mechanism in sophisticated watches that helps to get the time correct.
Not 250 this year, with more to follow. 250 total, full stop, with the company confirming there is no plan to expand that number under any circumstance. And here is the part that should stop you in your tracks. Every single one of those 250 cars sold before the first customer delivery ever happened. Think about what that actually means. Bugatti never had to run a marketing campaign convincing people to buy this car. It never had to discount a single unit, never had to sweeten a deal, never had to wonder whether demand would show up. The waiting list filled itself before the car had even been driven by anyone outside the factory. Isn't that the strangest kind of confidence a car company can have? Selling out a multi-million-dollar product based purely on a reveal and a spec sheet. The starting price tells part of the story. 3,800,000 euros net.
Incredible. So 3.6 million euro.
No, 3.8 million.
3.8
million euros.
Okay, sorry. Oh, damn. Need to earn another 200 grand. 3.8 plus tax?
Plus tax.
Before a single option gets added, somewhere around $4,100,000 at current exchange rates. But that number is really just the entry fee. Most buyers who actually finish customizing their tourbillon end up paying well north of $5 million once paint, interior materials, and bespoke detailing get added on top. At that price point, you are no longer simply buying a car. You are buying admission into a club that will never grow past 250 members. Deliveries finally began in 2026, which means the people who placed their orders back when this car was still just a live stream reveal in 2024 have waited roughly 2 years to actually take possession. That is an extraordinarily long time to wait for anything, let alone a car you've already paid for in full. Why would anyone agree to that kind of wait? Because the alternative, not getting one at all, was never actually on the table for most of these buyers. Once the allocation closed, it closed. There was no second chance, no overflow list, no way to simply pay more and jump the line. That scarcity isn't a marketing trick, it's baked into the entire philosophy behind how this company has decided to build hypercars going forward. And that philosophy starts under the hood, with an engineering decision that goes directly against where the rest of the industry is heading. It's also worth asking who actually buys a car like this, sight unseen, 2 years before it arrives. These aren't impulse purchases. The kind of buyer who reserves a 7-figure hypercar off a live stream reveal is typically someone who already owns several other exclusive cars. Someone for whom the waiting period itself is part of the appeal, rather than an inconvenience to be tolerated. For that kind of collector, a 2-year wait isn't a flaw in the process. It's confirmation that they're buying something genuinely rare, rather than something any sufficiently wealthy person could simply walk in and purchase off a showroom floor. Even the car's name was chosen with that same audience in mind. A tourbillon In traditional watchmaking,
Tourbillon, like an expensive watch.
It's a mechanism in high-end watches that increases accuracy.
refers to one of the most complex and admired mechanisms a watchmaker can build. A rotating cage designed to counteract the effects of gravity on a watch's internal movement. Prized for centuries by collectors who understand exactly how difficult it is to execute well. Naming the car after that mechanism wasn't a marketing department's idea pulled from a list of elegant-sounding words. The car's interior design draws directly on that same watchmaking inspiration, with mechanical detailing visible throughout the cabin that nods toward the same obsession with precision craftsmanship that defines a hand-built timepiece. For a buyer who already collects fine watches, that connection isn't subtle. It's the entire point. The engine that refused to turbocharge. Every major hypercar maker on the planet right now is chasing the same formula. Take a smaller engine, strap on a turbocharger or two, and use electric motors to fill in the gaps until the turbo spools up. It's the dominant approach because it works, and because it lets manufacturers hit enormous power numbers without building engines the size of a small refrigerator. Bugatti looked at that exact formula and walked in the opposite direction entirely. The Tourbillon's engine is an 8.3-liter V16, 16 cylinders.
This is Bugatti's new 8.3-litre V16 engine that's due to go into the successor to the Chiron. Now this is a naturally aspirated motor that revs to 9,000 RPM.
Arranged in a way almost no other manufacturer on Earth still attempts. And it has no turbocharger at all. None. At a time when even other ultra-exclusive hypercar brands have leaned into forced induction to hit their power targets, Bugatti built a screaming, naturally aspirated engine that has to earn every bit of its output the hard way through sheer displacement and engineering precision, rather than boost pressure. Doesn't that feel like the kind of decision that only makes sense if you genuinely don't care what anyone else in the industry is doing? That engine alone produces 1,000 PS, somewhere in the neighborhood of 986 horsepower, entirely on its own, with no electric assistance required to hit that figure. It was built by Cosworth, a name with deep roots in motorsport engineering, which tells you this was never meant to be a quiet, comfortable engine humming along in the background. It was built to be heard, to be felt, and to remind everyone inside the cabin that there are still 16 cylinders working without any artificial boost helping them along. Why does this matter beyond simple nostalgia for old-school engineering? Because naturally aspirated engines of this size and complexity are becoming nearly impossible to justify under modern emissions and efficiency rules. Most manufacturers will tell you it simply isn't viable anymore. Too heavy, too thirsty, too hard to certify. Bugatti built one anyway, paired it with hybrid technology, not to replace the engine's character, but to supplement it, and somehow made the entire combination legal, drivable, and ready for delivery in 2026. That alone might be the most quietly rebellious engineering decision in the entire hypercar industry, right now. This is also where the influence of Bugatti's newer ownership becomes obvious. The Tourbillon represents the first hypercar built without legacy components or engineering carried over from the previous ownership era. Designed instead under the direction of Mate Rimac and his team, combining an old-school combustion philosophy with new electric technology wasn't an accident. It was the entire point of the exercise. A deliberate statement about what a modern hypercar could still look like underneath all the new technology layered on top. There's a sound argument buried in this engineering choice too, beyond just nostalgia. A naturally aspirated engine responds to driver input in a way no turbocharged engine ever fully replicates. Throttle response that arrives the instant a foot moves, rather than a fraction of a second later, once boost pressure builds. For a company built on the idea that every detail should feel deliberate and connected, That immediacy matters in a way that's difficult to quantify on a spec sheet, but immediately obvious from behind the wheel. It's worth putting this choice in context against the rest of the hypercar world. Rivals like Koenigsegg have built their reputation on smaller, turbocharged engines, paired aggressively with forced induction, chasing massive power figures from far less displacement. Bugatti looked at that entire approach and effectively said it wasn't interested, choosing instead to build the largest, most complex naturally aspirated engine the modern hypercar world has seen in years.
They increase all parameters, in fact. They increase the power of the engine, they increase the acceleration, they increase the maximum speed, we increase the dry performance, the wet performance.
And letting the electric motors handle the gaps a turbocharger would normally fill. Two completely different philosophies, built by two completely different teams of engineers, both arriving at similarly outrageous power figures through almost opposite methods. Which says plenty about just how many ways there are to solve the same basic problem at this level of the industry. The engineering behind 2 seconds. Combined output across the engine and the electric motors reaches 1,800 PS, somewhere around 1,775 horsepower, depending on which measurement standard gets used. To put that in perspective, that is more combined power than most small countries' entire vintage car collections could produce if you added every engine together. The acceleration numbers match the power figure. Bugatti's own data puts the 0 to 60 time at approximately 2 seconds flat, meaning this car can go from a complete stop to highway speed in less time than it takes to read this sentence out loud. And the car doesn't stop accelerating once it hits highway speed either. With the limiter left in place, top speed sits at 236 miles per hour. Insert the manufacturer's specific unlocking key, and that number climbs all the way to 276 miles per hour. Is there any other consumer product on the planet where a literal physical key changes the top-end performance by 40 miles per hour? What makes those numbers even more impressive is what they're not relying on. This isn't a car that achieves its performance through sheer brute weight and an enormous engine alone. It's actually lighter than the Chiron that came before it, weighing in at under 4,400 pounds, despite carrying a battery pack, 3 electric motors, and a 16-cylinder engine simultaneously. Every gram of that lost weight had to be fought for. Considering everything this car is carrying compared to its predecessor, the transmission handling all of that power is an 8-speed dual-clutch gearbox, built specifically to manage both the combustion engine's power delivery and the instant torque coming from the electric motors, without either system fighting against the other. Getting two completely different power sources, one that needs to build revs to deliver its peak, and one that delivers maximum torque the instant it's asked to. To work together smoothly is one of the harder engineering problems in modern performance car design. The fact that Bugatti pulled it off well enough to post a 2-second sprint to highway speed says everything about how much engineering effort actually sits underneath these headline numbers. None of these figures happened by accident, and none of them happened quickly, either. Every one of these numbers traces back to a deliberate decision, somewhere inside the engineering process, including the choice to add 3 separate electric motors to a car that already had more than enough horsepower from its engine alone. There's also a practical side to these numbers that often gets lost in the excitement over top speed. Real-world driving rarely involves chasing 276 miles per hour, but it constantly involves quick bursts of acceleration, merging onto a highway, overtaking on a mountain road, pulling away from a stoplight. It's in those everyday moments, far more than at the very top of the speedometer, where a 2-second sprint to highway speed actually changes how a car feels to drive every single time the driver presses the accelerator. There's one more dimension to this engine that no spec sheet number can really capture, and that's sound. A naturally aspirated 16-cylinder engine, spinning toward its upper rev range produces a completely different acoustic signature than any turbocharged engine ever could, that a turbocharger tends to impose on an engine's natural voice. For a car built around the idea that every detail should be felt, rather than simply measured, the sound of 16 cylinders working without forced induction may end up being the single most memorable part of actually owning one. Long after the novelty of the top speed number has worn off. The electric secret inside, the V16. It would have been easy for Bugatti to treat the electric motors in this car as a simple marketing checkbox. Something to mention briefly before moving on to talk about the V16. Everyone actually came to hear about. Instead, the electric system in the Tourbillon does real, substantial work, contributing 800 PS of its own across 3 separate motors, 2 mounted at the front axle and 1 positioned between the engine and the transmission at the rear. Why split the electric power across 3 separate motors instead of 1 larger unit? Because each motor is solving a slightly different problem. The 2 front motors give the Tourbillon something a purely rear-wheel drive hypercar of this power level could never safely manage. Genuine all-wheel drive traction with the ability to send power to the front wheels independently and adjust how much each wheel receives based on what the car needs in that exact moment. The rear motor, meanwhile, fills in the brief moment right as the engine is still building revs, smoothing out what would otherwise be a small but noticeable delay in power delivery. The battery powering all 3 motors holds 24.8 kilowatt-hours of energy, running through an 800-volt system with electric motors, capable of spinning up to 24,000 RPM, a number that sounds more like a high-performance drone motor than anything found in a passenger vehicle. That power density allows the electric side of this car to react almost instantly, filling in torque exactly when the V16 needs help most, particularly at lower engine speeds, where a naturally aspirated engine of this size would otherwise feel comparatively lazy off the line. And here's the detail that surprises people who assume hybrid systems exist purely for performance. The Tourbillon can actually drive on electric power alone for more than 37 miles before the V16 needs to wake up at all. That's enough range to handle an entire daily commute, school run, or trip through a quiet residential neighborhood without a single cylinder firing. Doesn't that completely upend the assumption that a 16-cylinder hypercar has to be loud and thirsty every single time it leaves the garage? That kind of everyday usability matters more than it might seem for a car at this price point. Most hypercars in this category are built almost exclusively for spirited weekend drives or the occasional track day, sitting under a cover the rest of the time because they're simply too impractical for daily use. A car that can quietly creep out of a neighborhood on electric power alone, before unleashing 16 cylinders once it reaches open road, closes some of that practicality gap, letting owners actually use the car more often instead of treating it purely as a static collector's piece. Between rare outings, this is the real argument for why Bugatti bothered building a hybrid system at all, instead of simply leaning harder on the V16 alone. The electric motors aren't there to inflate a horsepower number for a press release. They're solving genuine engineering problems. Traction, torque fill, while still letting the V16 remain the emotional centerpiece of the entire car. It's a balancing act that very few manufacturers have managed to pull off convincingly, and it's part of why so few of these cars will ever actually exist. There's an engineering trade-off hiding inside all of this that deserves attention too. Every kilowatt-hour of battery, every electric motor, and every inch of wiring needed to connect all 3 systems adds weight to a car that's already carrying a full-sized 16-cylinder engine.
V16 engine as a generator to keep the battery topped up. This will be handy if you want to save the maximum electric range for the last section of your journey.
Had to fight for weight savings Everywhere else on the car, lighter body panels, a more efficient chassis, and components trimmed down wherever the engineering allowed it. The secret behind a $1 million hypercar. Here's a question worth sitting with for a moment. If demand for this car was already locked in before a single delivery happened, why wouldn't Bugatti simply build more of them, faster, and capture even more revenue from a clearly insatiable market? The answer says almost everything about what this company is actually trying to be. Bugatti has confirmed that production will run at roughly 80 cars per year, with the entire 250-unit run wrapping up by 2029. At that pace, building a single Tourbillon takes somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 days, even with the company running multiple builds simultaneously across its small workforce. That isn't a bottleneck born from struggling to keep up with demand. It's a deliberate ceiling, chosen on purpose, that the company has stated outright it will not raise no matter how much additional money gets offered. Compare that to the production run of the Chiron that came before it. The Tourbillon's total run is roughly half the size of its predecessors, while the starting price has more than doubled. Every single generation of Bugatti's flagship hypercar has followed this same pattern: fewer units, higher prices, longer waits. That isn't an accident of supply chain issues or manufacturing limitations. It's a business philosophy that treats scarcity itself as the actual product being sold, with the car serving as the physical proof of that scarcity. What does that mean for the 250 people who actually own one of these cars? It means owning a Tourbillon isn't just about owning a fast car. It's about owning something that will, by design, never become more common than it already is.
Auto industry works. What you're looking at is Bugatti.
No surprise expansion of the production run. No special edition that dilutes the original 250. No future announcement that quietly doubles the number after the initial buzz settles down. Whatever the value of that exclusivity does over the next decade, it was decided the moment the company drew a hard line at 250 and refused to move it. There's also something almost old-fashioned about building cars this slowly, in an era where automakers are constantly chasing scale and speed of production. Hand-assembling a hypercar at a rate of roughly 1 every 4 days, inside a single dedicated facility in Molsheim, France, is closer to how the original Bugatti built cars a century ago than how any modern automaker typically operates today. Whether that's a smart business decision or simply a stubborn commitment to craftsmanship over efficiency depends entirely on who you ask. But either way, it's the reason this car feels less like a product and more like an artifact the moment it rolls out of the factory. That artifact-like quality has a real effect on what happens to these cars long after delivery, too. Hypercars built in the hundreds, rather than the thousands.
The world's first electric British hypercar, the Lotus Evija.
It will be the most powerful production car in the world.
Tend to hold their value differently than ordinary high-performance cars, sometimes appreciating well beyond their original price, simply because the supply will never increase again. Nobody can say for certain what a Tourbillon will be worth a decade from now, but the math behind 250 units, a hard production cap, and a brand with this much history behind it tends to favor the owners far more than it favors anyone hoping to buy one secondhand at a discount. That's what 250 buyers got. A car named after a watchmaking mechanism, built around an engine that ignores where the industry is heading, locked into a cap that will never move no matter how much money shows up. Half the units of the Chiron, double the price, and a 2-year wait nobody got to skip. Whether that's worth it is something only those owners will ever know. If this breakdown is something you want more of, hit that like button. Then drop a comment. Would you take the screaming V16 or a fully electric hypercar with bigger numbers? Subscribe, because next time we put it against its biggest rival.